The Cleveland Browns have lived through chaos before, but what's happening right now feels like a breaking point, something bigger than a quarterback controversy or a coaching mistake. This isn't about who starts on Sunday. This is about power, money, loyalty, and the survival of a franchise that has been chasing stability for decades. At the heart of it all is one name: Shedeur Sanders. The bombshell dropped when reports surfaced that the Green Bay Packers had gone all in, making a monster push to land Sanders. We're not talking about whispers of interest or a casual inquiry. We're talking about an aggressive, calculated move, an offer on the table so bold that it shook the NFL. Green Bay, a team that has built its legacy on quarterbacks from Bart Starr to Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers, wanted Sanders to be the next in line. They weren't just making calls. They were willing to back up the talk with draft capital, proven players, and a full-scale commitment to making Sanders their franchise face. For Cleveland, the timing couldn't have been worse. Inside their locker room, doubts were already simmering. Kevin Stefanski had hitched his wagon to Joe Flacco, a respected veteran but one whose ceiling was obvious. That choice, safe, conservative, and uninspired, alienated parts of the roster. Younger players, particularly those on the offensive side of the ball, believed Sanders brought a spark that Flacco couldn't. Veterans wondered if Stefanski was too stubborn, too protective of his system to let raw talent shine. The fractures were there. The Packers' offer didn't create the chaos, it detonated it. Think about what Sanders represents. He isn't just a quarterback prospect, he's a cultural movement. With the last name Sanders, he brings star power that transcends football. Merchandise, sponsorships, primetime slots, ratings, NFL owners dream of that kind of leverage. And for the Browns owner Jimmy Haslam, the idea of letting that slip away wasn't just football malpractice. It was a business nightmare. Sources say Haslam's anger behind closed doors was volcanic. To him, keeping Sanders wasn't just about winning games. It was about securing the Browns' relevance on a national stage for the next decade. And then there's the locker room itself. Within hours of the Green Bay news breaking, players were whispering. Some were furious that their organization would even consider entertaining a deal. Others admitted, off the record, that the thought of Sanders escaping Cleveland's dysfunction and thriving somewhere else scared them. It would expose the Browns as the same old Browns. By the end of the week, the walls of Berea were buzzing with one unavoidable question. If Green Bay saw Sanders as the future, why didn't their own coach? That's the bombshell. Not just that the Packers wanted Sanders, not just that Cleveland almost lost him. The real story is what it revealed: the fractures between coach and owner, the divide in the locker room, the clash between loyalty to veterans and belief in the future. One offer from Green Bay pulled the mask off, and suddenly the Browns weren't just another NFL team. They were a franchise on the verge of civil war. The Packers don't throw desperation passes. Their entire history is built on patience, tradition, and stability. Yet when the Sanders sweepstakes heated up, Green Bay moved in a way that felt uncharacteristic for such a measured franchise. They didn't just test the waters, they cannonballed into them. Reports claim the front office had identified Sanders as more than just another quarterback prospect. They viewed him as the missing piece to reclaiming dominance in the NFC. Think about where the Packers stood. Jordan Love had shown flashes, but he hadn't cemented himself as the unquestioned heir to Aaron Rodgers. In a league where quarterback play decides everything, that uncertainty gnawed at ownership and fans alike. Green Bay has lived through the luxury of Hall of Fame passers for 30 straight years. Going back to mediocrity wasn't an option. Sanders, with his arm talent, mobility, and larger-than-life persona, represented not just a player, but an identity shift. Behind closed doors, the Packers' strategy was aggressive and detailed. Sources say the front office mapped out scenarios where Sanders could be acquired without gutting the roster. Draft picks, future capital, even key veterans were floated in preliminary discussions. What made this move fascinating was the willingness to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term security. That's not the Green Bay way. This was an all-in bet on a player who hadn't even fully proven himself at the NFL level yet. The timing wasn't accidental either. By making their push when Cleveland's locker room was already fractured, the Packers applied maximum pressure. The front office knew that any public knowledge of their interest would destabilize the Browns even more. If Cleveland folded under the noise, Green Bay could swoop in as saviors. If they didn't, the Packers still gained leverage by reminding their own fans that they were willing to go bold for greatness. But this wasn't just a football calculation, it was cultural. Sanders brought star power that Green Bay hasn't truly had since Rodgers was in his prime. His name would sell jerseys, fill Lambeau, and turn the franchise into a national headline machine again. The Packers weren't simply chasing wins, they were chasing relevance on and off the field. This calculated move wasn't reckless, it was ruthless. And for Cleveland, it forced them into a corner they weren't ready to face. For Kevin Stefanski, the Green Bay offer didn't just complicate his job, it exposed the fragile ground he was already standing on. Before Sanders even entered the picture, Stefanski had cultivated a reputation as a steady, system-first coach. He was the type who believed in structure, in minimizing risks, in leaning on veterans who knew the playbook rather than gambling on raw talent. For years, that philosophy had kept him in the good graces of management. But in the NFL, what looks like stability can just as easily be read as stagnation. And when the Packers came knocking, that perception shifted fast. Inside the locker room, Stefanski's commitment to Joe Flacco had already raised eyebrows. Players respected Flacco's Super Bowl pedigree, but they could see what the film showed: limited mobility, a slower release, and a ceiling that wouldn't carry them deep into the playoffs. When Stefanski doubled down on his veteran rather than unleashing Sanders, frustration simmered. Younger guys wondered if the coach was blind to the obvious spark Sanders provided. Veterans, meanwhile, questioned if Stefanski cared more about protecting his own scheme than actually winning. The Packers' pursuit of Sanders threw gasoline on those doubts. Suddenly, it wasn't just players grumbling. It was national media asking why Cleveland's head coach seemed to be the last person in the building to recognize Sanders' value. Every press conference became a minefield. Each time Stefanski defended Flacco, he looked more out of touch. Each time he sidestepped questions about Sanders, he sounded like a man desperately clinging to control. The calm, analytical coach who once commanded respect now looked defensive and exposed. Behind the scenes, whispers spread about Stefanski losing the locker room. Reports suggested that Sanders had more support among teammates than the man calling the plays. And when Green Bay's offer leaked, that perception hardened. Players began asking, if another franchise sees Sanders as the future, why doesn't our own coach? Stefanski's authority cracked not because of one decision, but because his players no longer believed he could steer them toward greatness. The collapse wasn't just internal. Ownership, particularly Jimmy Haslam, started to show visible frustration. For Haslam, Sanders was a business and cultural asset as much as a quarterback. Watching his head coach cling to a conservative strategy while other teams salivated over Sanders was maddening. Stefanski wasn't just making football decisions, he was costing the franchise millions in potential branding and exposure. By the time the smoke cleared, Stefanski wasn't seen as the steady hand anymore. He was the obstacle. The Packers hadn't just rattled Cleveland, they had exposed a leadership void. And in the unforgiving world of the NFL, once a coach loses both the locker room and the owner's faith, the writing is already on the wall. Stefanski hadn't been fired yet, but his collapse was already in motion. Jimmy Haslam has never been known for patience, and the Packers' bid for Sanders struck a nerve that few around the league had ever seen. To Haslam, this wasn't simply about X's and O's. It was about pride, money, and legacy. He had spent years pouring resources into a franchise often ridiculed as dysfunctional, and now, just when a superstar in the making was within his grasp, rumors swirled that his own head coach might sabotage it. The reaction was volcanic. Insiders described Haslam as packing, red-faced, and furious at the idea that Cleveland could be outmaneuvered for a quarterback who had the potential to transform the franchise's identity. But Haslam's anger didn't stay in the boardroom. Word of his frustrations filtered into the locker room, adding fuel to a fire already burning. Players had been quietly questioning Stefanski's choices for weeks, but now they felt empowered. If the owner himself believed Sanders was the future, what excuse did Stefanski have for burying him on the bench? Tension mounted as players began picking sides. Some, mostly veterans aligned with Stefanski's conservative philosophy, stuck with Flacco. But younger stars and skill position players leaned toward Sanders, openly expressing that the team needed his energy and playmaking. Section 7. The Fall of Stefanski. That's when the whispers turned into something louder. Accounts began to leak of heated exchanges during practices and film sessions, where players challenged coaching decisions and pointedly asked why Sanders wasn't being given the keys. What might have been dismissed as normal frustration in another season now felt like the early stages of revolt. The Packers' offer had done more than tempt Cleveland. It had exposed cracks that were splitting wide open. Haslam's meltdown only intensified things. His insistence on keeping Sanders created a direct clash with Stefanski's authority. Players saw the power struggle and knew which way the wind was blowing. For many, it became less about winning the next game and more about surviving the storm of egos above them. That kind of atmosphere doesn't just distract a team, it poisons it. By the time reporters picked up on the growing rift, the damage was already done. Cleveland wasn't just battling opponents on the field. They were fighting themselves in the locker room, pulled apart by a coach on shaky ground, an owner in open rage, and a roster divided over the one player who could define their future. Through the chaos, one figure remained remarkably composed: Shedeur Sanders. While coaches clashed, owners raged, and teammates whispered, Sanders conveyed more with silence and subtle action than most could with a press conference. His approach wasn't flashy or attention-seeking. It was calculated, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Every movement, every post, every interaction sent a message. He was ready, patient, and fully aware of the storm surrounding him. In the locker room, Sanders didn't complain. He studied film with focus unmatched by anyone else. He worked with receivers, ran drills with precision, and treated every practice as if it were a playoff game. Observers noted his quiet leadership. He corrected teammates with calm authority, offered encouragement without ego, and consistently positioned himself as a stabilizing force in an environment that was anything but stable. While Stefanski refused to activate him, Sanders refused to sulk. Instead, he let performance and professionalism speak on his behalf. His social media became a subtle battlefield. Neutral attire, no Browns logos, cryptic posts, and selective engagement painted a picture of a player who knew he was bigger than any single organization. He liked posts analyzing the Packers' interest, reposted highlight reels with meaningful captions, and remained deliberately ambiguous. Fans and analysts dissected every pixel, searching for hidden intentions or messages. To Sanders, it seemed, perception was part of the game. Allowing others to speculate amplified the pressure on the organization without a word from him. Even off the field, Sanders' decisions spoke volumes. He hired new representation skilled in facilitating trades, signaling that while he remained loyal on the surface, he understood his career, and his opportunity might demand movement. Sources say teammates noticed subtle shifts. Sanders no longer publicly donned team apparel, his schedule reflected preparation beyond the Browns, and his interactions hinted at self-possession that few rookies possess. The man wasn't just a player, he was a statement. What's remarkable is how Sanders maintained equilibrium. Amid locker room tension, media frenzy, and owner meltdowns, he projected calm confidence. Where others screamed, Sanders listened. Where others reacted, he prepared. His composure forced attention without confrontation, making everyone around him, coaches, teammates, management, and the media, acknowledge that the Browns' star wasn't a problem to be managed. He was an asset demanding respect. In a league where ego often overshadows talent, Sanders' restraint became his loudest declaration. He didn't need to argue, protest, or beg. His excellence and professionalism communicated everything necessary. In essence, he spoke without speaking, letting actions, body language, and subtle decisions broadcast a single truth. Cleveland had a generational talent in their midst, and anyone ignoring it did so at their peril. The breaking point arrived not with a bang, but a culmination of countless small explosions that had been building for weeks. The Browns' organization, already teetering under internal tension, media scrutiny, and fan expectation, reached a moment where nothing could be contained. Every misstep by Kevin Stefanski, every frustrated glance from a player, and every cryptic social media post from Shedeur Sanders added layers to a pressure cooker about to blow. Practice sessions became theater. Routine drills turned into showcases of disparity. Flacco struggled through plays, mechanically and visibly frustrated, while Sanders executed the same reps with precision, creativity, and leadership that seemed effortless. Teammates whispered, journalists observed, and social media dissected every interaction. The contrast was glaring. The narrative had shifted from curiosity to outrage. Cleveland was wasting its once-in-a-generation talent, and everyone, fans, media, and league insiders, could see it. Off the field, ownership panic escalated. Haslam reportedly convened emergency meetings, demanding solutions while grappling with the realization that a rookie he invested in so heavily might slip away, not because of external forces, but due to internal dysfunction. The financial implications alone were staggering. Merchandise sales, ticket renewals, and marketing campaigns all centered around Sanders' potential. And now the organization faced the prospect of hemorrhaging revenue and credibility simultaneously. Players, sensing the fragility, began to take matters into their own hands. A meeting without coaches was reportedly called, where veterans and younger stars alike voiced frustrations openly. Questions of fairness, meritocracy, and future prospects filled the room. The message was unanimous. Sanders needed to play. Anything less was not just a football mistake, it was a moral failure, a betrayal of opportunity, and a dereliction of leadership. Stefanski's authority, already shaky, began to crumble entirely under the weight of organized dissent. The national media amplified every nuance. Commentators dissected film, replayed cryptic posts, and questioned organizational competence. Social platforms erupted with fan protests, hashtags, and calls for immediate change. The Browns' crisis became a cultural phenomenon, a case study in what happens when talent, ego, and mismanagement collide. Analysts debated whether Cleveland was a cautionary tale or a ticking time bomb of lost opportunity, and every opinion added fuel to the already raging fire. By the time game day arrived, the breaking point had been reached. Sanders, fully prepared and quietly commanding respect, sat on the sidelines while the team floundered. Flacco struggled, drives stalled, and frustration spilled into the stands. Fans, once patient, erupted in protest. The contrast between what could be and what was became unbearable. The organization faced an undeniable truth. The system had failed the player, the team, and itself. At this moment, everything, ownership, coaching, players, and public perception collided. The Browns had crossed the threshold from dysfunction into full-blown organizational crisis, and nothing would ever be the same.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button.
As the Sanders saga unfolded, the eyes of the NFL universe turned toward Cleveland. Fans, long accustomed to disappointment, suddenly found themselves in a rare position. The fate of the franchise rested on one decision. Social media became a battlefield. Hashtags demanding Sanders' play went viral, while fan-made graphics depicting him in Green Bay green sparked intense debate. Billboards appeared overnight, reading, "Play Sanders or lose everything," and local radio lines flooded with callers demanding accountability. The message was clear. Cleveland's supporters were no longer passive observers. They were active participants in the story. National media coverage intensified the pressure. Analysts dissected every practice clip, every sideline interaction, every cryptic social post. Commentators questioned the competence of Brown's leadership and speculated on the long-term ramifications of ignoring a generational talent. Shows like Pat McAfee and segments on ESPN dedicated hours to Sanders' situation, framing Cleveland as a cautionary tale of organizational dysfunction. The scrutiny wasn't just about football. It was about ethics, fairness, and maximizing potential in the modern NFL. Even league offices and executives weighed in quietly. Television networks had invested heavily in primetime broadcasts, expecting the Browns to field their future star quarterback. Sponsors monitored social media trends, understanding the direct link between Sanders, presence and engagement, merchandise sales, and viewership ratings. Every day that Sanders remained on the bench was a day of mounting economic and reputational risk for the franchise. Pressure from all sides created a perfect storm. Ownership faced public humiliation and internal conflict. Coaches navigated a fractured locker room, and players tried to focus on execution amid chaos. Every tweet, headline, and fan protest reminded the organization that decisions were no longer isolated. They were magnified across the sport and beyond. In short, the entire NFL ecosystem was watching, waiting, and measuring Cleveland's ability to handle a once-in-a-generation opportunity responsibly. The convergence of fans, media, and league pressure forced the Browns into a high-stakes scenario where every action or inaction had immediate consequences. In the face of mounting scrutiny, the franchise had no choice but to confront the crisis head-on. The question became not if, but when, they would allow Sanders to step onto the field and take control of the narrative himself. The culmination of weeks of tension, mismanagement, and public scrutiny finally fell squarely on Kevin Stefanski. What had begun as whispers in the locker room and subtle fan outrage erupted into an undeniable reality. The Browns' head coach had lost control of his team, his authority, and the narrative surrounding the organization. The combination of Sanders' silent defiance, Haslam's mounting frustration, and relentless media pressure created a perfect storm that Stefanski could not weather. Practices that once ran smoothly devolved into exercises in chaos. Flacco struggled through reps, while Sanders executed the same plays with precision and energy. Teammates openly questioned coaching decisions, and assistants exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to support Stefanski publicly or acknowledge the growing truth privately. Every sideline interaction and every tactical call became a microcosm of the wider dysfunction, exposing Stefanski as increasingly disconnected from the reality around him. Ownership reached a tipping point. Haslam, after hours of emergency meetings and heated discussions with front office staff, recognized that Stefanski's refusal to activate Sanders was no longer a philosophical choice. It was a liability threatening both the team's performance and the franchise's financial standing. Reports indicated that private conversations became heated, even bordering on physical confrontation, highlighting the erosion of mutual trust and respect. Stefanski's coaching philosophy, once praised for patience and structure, was now viewed as stubbornness and incompetence. National media outlets were relentless. Commentators dissected film, amplified fan outrage, and scrutinized every decision Stefanski made, or failed to make. Analysts framed the situation as a case study in what happens when ego and outdated methods block opportunity. Even rival teams and league executives quietly noted the implosion, further exposing Stefanski's fall from grace. By the time official action was taken, it was almost anticlimactic. Stefanski was relieved of his duties, a formal acknowledgement of what everyone had already witnessed. The Browns' leader had become an obstacle to the team's success. Players celebrated privately, while the media framed the firing as both inevitable and overdue. In losing his position, Stefanski's legacy in Cleveland became defined not by his earlier accomplishments, but by the collapse that allowed one extraordinary talent to sit idle under his watch. The message was clear. In the NFL, failing to recognize generational talent is a risk no coach can survive. The anticipation surrounding Shedeur Sanders' first start reached a fever pitch. After weeks of speculation, locker room tension, and public pressure, the moment had finally arrived. Fans packed the stadium hours early, eager to witness the rookie quarterback who had dominated headlines without ever taking a meaningful snap. National media descended in full force, with cameras and reporters filling every corner, all focused on the one question burning in everyone's mind. Could Sanders validate the hype and justify the chaos that had consumed the Browns' organization? From the first snap, it was clear Sanders was in complete command. His pregame warm-ups radiated focus, precision, and confidence. Receivers ran routes with renewed energy, linemen protected with purpose, and the offense moved with a rhythm previously unseen under Flacco's struggling stewardship. Every throw, every read, every adjustment reflected not only his talent, but also his preparation, professionalism, and leadership. The energy in the stadium was palpable, a mix of relief, excitement, and awe. Sanders didn't just perform, he dominated. Deep passes threaded perfectly between defenders, scrambles avoided pressure effortlessly, and audibles at the line showcased football IQ beyond his years. Each completion generated cheers, each explosive run amplified the momentum, and the crowd fed on the electricity that Sanders brought to the field. Where the Browns had previously struggled to maintain drives, Sanders orchestrated sustained, methodical, and explosive sequences, forcing the opposition to react rather than dictate. The rookie's ability to balance poise with aggression became immediately evident. He maintained composure in high-pressure moments, made split-second decisions that turned potential sacks into first downs, and consistently exploited defensive weaknesses. His dual-threat capabilities, arm strength and mobility, maximized every aspect of the playbook. The coaching staff, now freed from the previous political constraints, called plays that highlighted Sanders' strengths, creating a synergy that transformed the offense overnight. By halftime, the narrative had completely shifted. The Browns, once mired in dysfunction and debate, now appeared revitalized. Sanders' performance was not just statistically impressive, it was symbolic. He represented the culmination of patience, preparation, and talent finally given its opportunity. Fans, media, and players alike recognized that the Browns had uncovered their franchise cornerstone, a player capable of redefining the team's trajectory for years to come. When the final whistle blew, the stats told a story of dominance: multiple touchdown passes, significant rushing yards, and a completion rate reflecting efficiency and precision. But beyond numbers, Sanders' first start marked the restoration of hope for a franchise long starved of it. The locker room erupted in celebration, fans poured into the stands in jubilation, and analysts across the country proclaimed the birth of a new star. For Sanders, it was validation. For the Browns, it was a turning point. And for the NFL, it was a reminder that talent, when recognized and unleashed, can change everything. The saga of Shedeur Sanders and the Cleveland Browns reaches a crossroads that will define the franchise for years to come. After chaos, tension, and organizational dysfunction, the team now faces a pivotal choice: build around the generational talent they have nurtured, or risk repeating a familiar cycle of mismanagement. The events of the past weeks have laid bare the consequences of indecision, misplaced authority, and the cost of ignoring potential. Sanders' first start symbolized more than individual brilliance. It was proof of what the Browns could achieve when talent, preparation, and opportunity align. Fans and media alike now recognize that success is possible, but it requires commitment at every level. Ownership must support vision over ego, coaches must prioritize performance over politics, and players must continue to embrace leadership and teamwork. The franchise stands at a delicate balance, where past mistakes could either inform wiser decisions or be repeated under pressure. Ownership faces a defining choice: leverage Sanders' abilities to build a sustainable contender or allow short-term distractions to dictate long-term strategy. The front office must navigate negotiations, maintain team chemistry, and manage public expectation while ensuring that the foundation laid by Sanders' emergence is not undermined. Meanwhile, the coaching staff, reshaped by Stefanski's departure, has an opportunity to craft a culture that rewards merit, promotes accountability, and maximizes the quarterback's impact without succumbing to ego-driven obstacles. For fans, the crossroads represents hope mingled with caution. The excitement of witnessing Sanders' talent is tempered by the knowledge that Cleveland's history is littered with squandered opportunities. Yet, the combination of Sanders' professionalism, leadership, and on-field dominance offers a blueprint for change. If the organization embraces this moment, it could mark the beginning of a new era, one defined not by dysfunction and controversy, but by clarity, purpose, and championship aspirations. Ultimately, the story is far from over. The crossroads is not just about wins or losses. It is about vision, courage, and the willingness to make the decisions necessary to unlock a franchise's potential. Cleveland has been handed a rare opportunity, a generational talent, public support, and an engaged fan base, and how they respond will define their legacy. The choices made now will echo for years, shaping not only the team's trajectory, but also the identity of a franchise determined to finally rise from the ashes of its own chaos.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.